Welcome back to Spooky History Hole. Tonight, we're diving into 5 of the darkest, most chilling stories from World War II, where the echoes of the past still seem to linger. But I also want to hear from you. If you have any unexplained or eerie stories from the past, leave them in the comments and they might appear in a future video. And don't forget to subscribe, because there are countless shadows from history's past waiting to be uncovered. Story number 1. The Ghosts of Okinawa's Tunnels. Okinawa was supposed to be just another step in the Allied march across the Pacific. But when American forces landed in April of 1945, what they found was something closer to hell on Earth. The Japanese military had transformed the island into a fortress, and beneath its rocky hills stretched a hidden world, an endless web of caves and tunnels that served as command posts, makeshift hospitals, and last refuges for those unwilling to surrender. The fighting on Okinawa was savage and unlike anything many soldiers had ever seen. Artillery shook the ground, constantly collapsing tunnels and burying men alive. Flamethrowers roared into cave mouths, trapping those inside. And when defeat became certain, whole families, men, women, and children, retreated into those tunnels. Many chose to end their own lives over being captured. By the time the island was finally secured, the dead numbered in the tens of thousands, and the tunnels became tombs. In the years that followed, locals quickly learned to avoid certain areas at night. Farmers passing by cave openings swore they heard voices echoing from deep underground, faint, muffled cries, as if men were still calling for water or medics in the dark. Some claimed they could hear the rhythm of marching boots, ghostly platoons, moving through the earth long after the war had ended. American servicemen stationed on the island after the war also began sharing the eerie accounts. A group of Marines on night watch once reported seeing a line of soldiers in tattered uniforms silently walking down a jungle path. Their helmets cracked, their faces streaked with dirt and blood. The men assumed they had stumbled across Japanese survivors, still hiding in the hills, until the figures walked straight into the side of a cliff and disappeared. Other stories spoke of women clutching infants, standing motionless near tunnel entrances, their blank eyes following anyone who wandered too close. On more than one occasion, tourists reported hearing screams from within the caves, only to find them completely empty when explored. The unsettling detail is always the same. The sound never fades naturally. It cuts off abruptly, as though a switch had been thrown. What makes the legends of Okinawa's tunnels especially disturbing is the consistency of the accounts. Over decades, the same sounds, the same feelings of suffocating despair have been reported by people who never knew one another. Even locals, who are careful not to sensationalize their island's bloody history, admit there are places they will not go after sunset. To this day, some tunnels remain sealed, not only because they're dangerous to enter, but because many believe they're still occupied by those who died in them. Soldiers, civilians, even entire families, all bound to the earth, where their lives ended in terror. The war may have ended in 1945, but on Okinawa, the silence of the night is often broken by echoes from the past. Story number 2. The Haunting of Colditz Castle. Colditz Castle, perched high on a cliff in Saxony, Germany, had been a fortress for centuries before the Nazis turned it into a high-security prisoner of war camp during World War II. Reserved for Allied officers who had repeatedly attempted escapes from other camps, Colditz became infamous for its daring plots and ingenious tunneling operations. Yet behind the ingenuity and resilience, there are darker stories. Ones that suggest not every soul confined within those walls ever truly left. The castle itself was old its foundations dating back to the Middle Ages, long before the war. It had a reputation as a place of suffering. It had been a mental asylum, and later a political prison. That history weighed heavily on those who found themselves locked within its gray stone walls, especially at night. Prisoners and guards alike spoke of unexplainable happenings, footsteps echoing in deserted corridors, icy drafts sweeping through sealed rooms, and whispers in languages nobody could identify. One British officer wrote in his journal about a night when he was jolted awake by the sounds of boots running through the corridor outside his cell. When he looked through the bars, he saw nothing, only the flickering shadows of torchlight where no guard stood. He convinced himself it was his imagination, until others began to report similar incidents. The guards, hardened soldiers who prided themselves on discipline, weren't immune either. More than one admitted to hearing screams echoing from the castle's dungeons, even though those areas had been sealed for years. One story tells of a German sentry who abandoned his post after seeing a pale man climb the outer wall and then vanish into the stone itself. As the war dragged on, the tension in Colditz grew unbearable. The Allied officers dug tunnels, built makeshift gliders, and plotted escapes, but many never made it out. Some died in the attempt. Others wasted away in the damp, freezing cells, and to this day, visitors to the restored castle say the atmosphere remains heavy. Guides leading tours describe guests suddenly overcome with nausea or dread in certain rooms. Paranormal investigators who set up equipment inside the old dungeons have recorded unexplained voices. One chilling clip features a faint but distinct word: Fliehen, the German word for escape. Colditz Castle stands as both a monument to human ingenuity and endurance, and a reminder of the countless lives scarred within its walls. And if the stories are to be believed, some of those men never did escape, at least not entirely. Story number 3, the Phantom Pilots of Hendon Aerodrome. During World War II, Hendon Aerodrome in North London was a bustling hub of activity. Once a site for daring air shows and the birthplace of early British aviation, it was converted into a training and operations base for the Royal Air Force as the war intensified. Pilots departed from Hendon to patrol the skies, intercept enemy bombers, and to defend London during the Blitz. Many never returned. The airfield's history was marked by tragedy. New pilots, some barely out of their teens, were pushed into the cockpit with only the bare minimum of training. Crashes were common, especially in the frantic early years of the war, when every plane and every man was desperately needed. Nearby residents grew used to the sickening sound of engines sputtering and the sudden crash of aircraft failing to clear the tree lines. For many, Hendon became less a place of victory than a graveyard of young men who never had the chance to fight. As the war wore on, rumors began to circulate among those stationed there. Ground crews swore they saw pilots walking across the runways at night, their uniforms scorched and their faces blackened with soot, only to vanish into the darkness before anyone could approach. Mechanics working late in the hangars reported hearing the metallic clink of tools on fuselages, as if someone invisible was performing last-minute repairs on long-lost planes. One of the most chilling accounts comes from a group of trainees who were ordered to inspect the hangars in 1944 after a night raid. Inside, they found an old biplane, long decommissioned, with its engine inexplicably warm. A flight log had been scrawled on a clipboard nearby in handwriting none of them recognized. The name listed was that of a pilot who had died 2 years earlier in a crash off the English coast. Even after the war, when Hendon transitioned into peacetime use, the stories continued. Local residents walking past the old airfield at dusk, claimed to hear the unmistakable roar of Spitfire engines above, only to look up and see nothing in the sky. Museum staff, who later preserved Hendon as a site of aviation history, reported cold spots in certain hangars and the sensation of being watched. Some even claimed to hear the faint Morse code tapping in the radio room, though no equipment had been operational for decades. For many, Hendon's phantoms are not hostile, but a lingering reminder of sacrifice, young men eager to fly, cut down before their time. But others insist the atmosphere carries a darker edge, that the air itself feels charged with desperation and fear. To this day, visitors walk among the preserved aircraft and wonder if the figures they glimpse reflected in the polished glass of the museum cases are merely their own, or the silent pilots of a war that refuses to rest. Story number 4, the screams of Unit 731. In the remote reaches of Harbin, in northeast China, the Japanese Imperial Army operated one of the most secretive and horrific facilities of World War II, Unit 731. Officially, it was called the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. In reality, it was a site of unspeakable human experimentation. Thousands of men, women and children, mostly Chinese civilians and prisoners of war, were subjected to biological tests and weapons trials. Almost none survived. When the war ended, the facility was hastily abandoned. Evidence was burned, documents destroyed, and those who worked there fled, leaving behind only the crumbling buildings and the unmarked graves of their victims. But locals say the soil never forgot what happened, and neither did the spirits. For decades after the war, farmers living near the ruins told of strange sounds echoing across the fields at night. Some claimed they heard the shrieks of women carried on the wind, though no one was there. Others described a rhythmic pounding, like fists hammering against steel doors from underground. Dogs in nearby villages refused to go near the site. When dragged close, they would whimper, pull away, and in some cases collapse from sheer terror. Visitors who dared to explore the abandoned compound often reported feelings of sudden dread. One man described walking through the empty hallways and being overcome by the distinct smell of antiseptic and blood, though the building had been scrubbed clean decades earlier. Another swore he saw shadowy figures moving across the courtyard, their movements jerky and unnatural, as if their bodies were still broken from experiments. Perhaps the most terrifying tales come from construction workers in the 1980s. When the Chinese government decided to preserve part of the site as a museum, crews reported tools going missing or being hurled across the rooms with no one nearby. Some refused to enter the old laboratories at all, claiming they could hear the muffled cries of children from within the walls. One worker even collapsed after insisting a hand had gripped his ankle from beneath the floorboards. Even now, with Unit 731 partially restored as a grim reminder of wartime atrocities, visitors describe the same sensations. Sudden chills in rooms with no windows, disembodied voices whispering in Japanese and Chinese, and a suffocating weight in the air. Guides warned guests not to linger too long in the surgical wing, where many experiments took place. More than one tourist has fainted there, whispering upon waking that they felt like they were being watched by hundreds of unseen eyes. For those who believe in ghosts, Unit 731 is perhaps one of the most haunted places left behind by World War II. The suffering inflicted there was so great, so unnatural, that it seems impossible the dead could ever rest. Their agony is woven into the soil, echoing through the corridors, a reminder of the darkest depths of human cruelty. Story number 5, the wandering souls of the USS Hornet. The USS Hornet, an Essex-class aircraft carrier, saw some of the fiercest combat of World War II. Commissioned in 1943, She played a critical role in the Pacific Theater, launching planes during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, striking enemy ships, and enduring relentless kamikaze attacks. She became a floating city of war, where thousands of young sailors lived, fought, and too often died. Life aboard the Hornet was brutal. Aircraft accidents were frequent, sometimes sending planes crashing into the sea or exploding on deck. Kamikaze strikes left fires raging and bodies broken. Below deck, cramped quarters meant sailors were often only feet away from death, with nowhere to run when alarms sounded. In her few short years of active duty during the war, the Hornet lost hundreds of men, and some believe they never left. Today, the USS Hornet rests as a museum ship in Alameda, California. But according to countless visitors and staff, she's far from silent. Volunteers cleaning the ship late at night report the unmistakable sounds of footsteps pacing the steel decks, even when no one else is aboard. Doors creak open by themselves, and cold spots linger in the humid corridors. One former Navy veteran who toured the ship claimed he saw a man in a World War II-era uniform standing by the aircraft, inspecting it as though preparing for takeoff. When the visitor turned to speak, the figure simply vanished. Tour guides have shared similar stories. Groups of tourists asking about the sailor they just passed in the hallway, only to learn that no crew member had been assigned to that part of the ship. The engine room is said to be one of the most active spots. Workers have heard the clang of tools and the murmur of voices, as if the men who once kept the carrier's heart beating are still on duty. On more than one occasion, alarms have gone off in sealed compartments where no power is connected, echoing the ship's old battle stations. Perhaps the most unsettling reports come from the sleeping quarters. Visitors lying down in the preserved bunks for photographs sometimes feel a sudden pressure beside them, as if another body has settled in. Some even claim to wake in the middle of the night during overnight stays, seeing shadowy figures standing at the foot of their beds, men with weary faces, still dressed in oil-stained uniforms, silently watching before dissolving into the darkness. The Hornet's wartime history was once steeped in sacrifice, and for many who step aboard, it feels as though the ship itself remembers. It carries an atmosphere of duty and sorrow, a weight that presses down on those who walk its halls. Whether one believes in ghosts or not, the USS Hornet leaves visitors with the unshakable impression that its crew is still present, faithful to their post, guarding the vessel they gave their lives for. Do you believe spirits from the war are still among us? Share your thoughts, and if you have your own haunted story, drop it in the comments. Your story might be featured in a future video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss chilling true ghost stories from the past.